I'm going to talk about the case of the isolated seamstress. What makes it my favorite book that I've ever made? The fact that I finished it this week so that I would be ready to present it today. The number one thing that I was doing to finish the book this week was to make a case for it. The book itself is designed to hang in a gallery. And so rather than being in signatures that can be paged one by one, it's made that you can walk through it. And so the pages hang down the gallery at eye level. And so I kind of had an interesting problem of figuring out how to house it and display it when it's not hanging in a space. And so I also have a problem showing it on a screen because this is the box for it, and I can't quite fit the whole box in the frame. But you can see that the shape of the case is slightly tipped in the middle so that it's a little bit like a lectern. And I won't go on and on about the case, but it's easy for me to hold up the pages actually because it's unbound. It hangs from these little pieces. So this is the cover piece. This composition book style cover is something that I've been using for a long, long time. I have an ongoing series called Common Threads. I believe I'm currently working on volume 139 of that series. I've been making it for about 17 or 18 years. And those are actually smaller embroidered notebooks. And that's maybe the harder thing to see too, is that this pattern is stitched. So these are stitched by hand with embroidery thread. And that's what I use almost exclusively for making books. The title page for the case of the isolated seamstress, also stitched by hand in this sort of pulp novel style. And another thing that makes this book special is that it's my first attempt at writing fiction. So as Monica mentioned, I'm always collecting coincidences from my reading, and I use those coincidences and represent them in these notebooks that are sort of like journals or collections of, or maybe like a large comparative literature project. For this particular book, I read a particular type of mystery for a given period of time. I think it was about 3 months. I only read novels that fall into the genre of locked room mysteries. If you're unfamiliar with this genre, it's the type of mystery that takes place within a room that is sealed from any outside elements. So it's sort of a mystery in its purest form, because only the clues that are within that sealed room can be part of solving the crime. So one of the things that kept coming up in this book are all of the sort of ridiculous things that novelists include in their books, despite the fact that it's just sort of illogical. Sometimes I think when a writer is writing a book, there's not really like someone there to say, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. For instance, I have several examples of secret passages that are just stumbled upon by the police. So it's a little bit strange because it's never like explained what made the passage secret, or some of these tropes that get a little bit overused. If you limit yourself only to genre reading, you will find that they crop up a lot. And that's helpful to me because it's sort of, and it's hard to say whether they count as coincidences or not. Also, the mere idea of a coincidence, when you're reading a mystery genre, a coincidence is always a clue. So that's something to be said. I don't want to talk forever without showing more parts of the book. I'm trying not to be super awkward about this. As you can see, some of the pages have had some violence done to them. I use stitches that look sort of like handwriting on some of the pages. There are illustrations of some of the scenes that are described inside. This one might even be a little harder to see. Those are trompe l'oeil bullet holes in that page. And so I alternate the written text with copies of pages from the books. A part of the story of this book is that the reader, or the isolated seamstress, is finding that someone has been underlining words in the books that she's reading. And she discovers that these underlined words might be more meaningful and be a code that is addressed directly to her. And so, I mean, I wouldn't want to give away any spoilers if you want to read the entire book. This also has the virtue of being the longest book that I've ever created. I want to say, oh, see, now I'm going to be, I can't pause and like count the pages. But just trust me, it's the longest one that I've made. So here's another example of the underlined text. So it was kind of fun to, as a physical challenge, to see if I could reproduce typed text, or printed text rather, with thread. Kind of a little bit different from reproducing my own handwriting, which I'm really used to doing. I want to talk a little bit about why I insist on stitching the lettering in the books. I've been doing it for a long time with the Common Threads books, and I think a lot of us as artists have maybe like just a very few ideas that we keep coming back to all of the time. I particularly like the tactile quality of a hand-stitched page, but I also like the practicality of making art that I can literally fold up and stuff into my pocket. And I started making these pages when I was working as a secretary, and I needed to be able to make a few pages at a time and not sort of spread out and take over my whole workstation with my with the book that I was making. And secondarily, I like the idea that the material of the book becomes one whole when it's stitched. It's a little bit like the satisfaction of printing onto high quality paper, is that you have the sense that you're creating one new thing when something is printed really well. But I like the idea that by stitching through the fabric, it's almost like it all becomes really unified into one surface, almost like a weaving or something. So I see I just keep pulling out more and more pages. Another thing that a lot of times happens when I'm stitching a book is that I'll find that I have to cross out some of my mistakes, and those little details end up on the page. Because there's no erasing when you're writing with ink, and so there's no real erasing when you're embroidering either. There was a passage that I was going to read to you. This feels very story time, like I'm shaking out my newspaper to share with you. But this is a short passage that I'll share about coincidence itself. Coincidence itself is a kind of underlining. I've had the experience so many times of hearing a word in the world at the same instant my eyes pass over that word in a book, and the word is imbued with a new significance. Who hasn't had the experience of learning a new word and afterwards reading it or hearing it everywhere? Would I have spent as much time mulling over the absurdity of the existence of the phrase white slavery if I hadn't read it in 2 books in a row? I honestly can't fathom the audacity of a worldview that allows for such a phrase to come into regular usage. And I really did read 2 books in a row that included the phrase white slavery. So sometimes you have to look out for genre fiction for that too. It can be a little distasteful to read a whole lot of mystery novels back to back. There's a lot of gender-based violence that comes up in these types of books. And so in some way too, anytime that I limit myself to a genre, the book that I write becomes a critique of that genre for sure. Another sort of absurd thing that I'm coming across here on page 19 is that in one of the stories that I read, drugs are smuggled into the city by way of Russian dolls, Russian nesting dolls. And the image of that is so perfect to me. This idea that the police exhaust themselves by trying to find the drugs within the nesting dolls. They just can't make it to the center. It's like it flummoxes them. The idea that that would be something that would deter the police or or drug dogs. You could just hide it at the center of too many nesting dolls and wear them down. It's an image that I still enjoy thinking about. That kind of this is the book. There's still more pages here. I will. Let's see. Pick out another trompe l'oeil page where the page is sort of ripped out of the book. And that is the case of the isolated seamstress.